Many people, when they first look into improving their posture, come to believe they have what's called forward head posture. You will find lots of advice out there for fixing forward head posture, and most of it involves pulling your head backward so that the back of your head lines up with your back. That's not just bad advice, that is advice that can lead to serious harm and pain down the road. If you think you have forward head posture, you most likely do have postural problems, and those problems are not just in your head and neck, they're in your entire body, and especially in your torso. So let's look at the torso of a before and after picture concerning forward head posture. We can see that this man's head is pulled back in the after picture, but how has he accomplished that? He's done that by moving his lower ribs and the bottom of his sternum forward. This has caused the bend in his back to increase dramatically, because what he's really doing here is pulling the top of his ribcage back and down. That is why the top of his sternum has moved back, and the bottom of his ribcage has moved very far forward. It's easy to understand from these pictures how our bodies adjust to compensate when weight is moved forward or back. If you pull your head and shoulders back, something has to go forward to compensate. And that is why you see that the man's lower ribs are now pressed forward. His abdomen is protruding even further ahead of him, and his back is more bent and hollowed out. We must ask ourselves, why would we want the head to be back like this? You might say the weight of his head is now more over the torso or heel, or that the weight is stacked better and not pulling him forward. But the weight of the bottom of his ribcage and abdomen has replaced the weight of his head. If you thought his head being forward was a problem, then his ribcage and abdomen being forward must certainly be just as much of a problem. Additionally, when the lower ribs are forward, the back is hollowed out and incapable of really providing support. This is what forward head posture completely misses. To support your head and neck, you need a strong back. But people have the misconception that the strength of your back comes from the strength of the muscles. However, your muscles are only part of the equation. The fascia in your back is where you are really going to get your support. At your back, along the length of your spine, you have fascia called your thoracolumbar fascia. Fascia needs to be taught to provide resistance for the muscles that attach to the fascia. Many muscles of your back, like your latissimus dorsi, trapezius, and serratus posterior superior, attach to your thoracolumbar fascia, as do important muscles of the legs and lower back, like your gluteus maximus, serratus posterior inferior, and hamstrings. If you have a bend in your back, you are shortening your torso. You are bringing the back ends of your torso closer together, which will make your thoracolumbar fascia slack and limp. When your fascia is limp, the muscles that attach to that fascia will be forced to malfunction, because fascia is supposed to be taut. That means that if you shorten your back by maintaining a bend in it, your back will not have properly functioning muscles or properly functioning fascia. How is your back going to be able to provide your head and neck with support when nothing in your back is working properly? In pictures of people combating their forward head posture, you will always see that the person's torso is bent in both the before and after pictures, because the person has done nothing to correct their torso. When your torso is bent, your head either falls forward from the lack of support, which gets called forward head posture, or you rotate your ribcage back, which brings your shoulders and head back. But that backward rotation doesn't lead to more support or proper balance. It doesn't unbend your torso, it just takes you from forward head posture to forward rib posture. Forward rib posture is actually much more concerning, because the rotation of the ribs that brings the bottom of the ribcage forward induces a significant bend at your back, which destroys the strength of your back because it makes your fascia limp. Whereas if you get the weight of the lower half of your ribcage back and up, though your head will be forward of your back, your taut fascia will support your head and neck, and the rest of your body. I will show you what that looks like in a moment. We also need to consider the throat, though. When you pull your head backward to be more in line with the back, you will be restricting your airway. Your airway connects from the back of your lungs to the back of your nose. If you pull your head back and the top of your sternum back, you're actually deforming your airway. This picture shows the airway in blue. Your airway is a flexible tube, and when you pull your neck back, you are compressing the walls of that tube. You'll still be able to breathe, but when you engage in vigorous exercise or attempt to do something stressful, like make a public speech, that lack of a clear and open airway will lead to harmful habits around breathing, like the sucking in of air with your nose or mouth, and will impair your ability to perform at your best. Now I would like to show you some pictures of a torso in what I consider a much better condition, and I would like you to compare them with the torsos we've seen so far. Here's a picture of Jando Masoero in the middle of a procedure where one hops their feet up off the floor while maintaining the poise of their torso. As you can see, his head is forward of his back, but his appearance is nothing like what you would see in someone displaying forward head posture. First, we can note that there is no bend in the lower back. Second, we can see that his sternum is not angled. Third, there is no stooping, as is common in those with forward head posture, because his ribcage is very high above his pelvis. So despite the fact that his head is forward of his back, he displays none of the normal problems of forward head posture. Because he has a long, unbent back, we know his thoracolumbar fascia is taut, and that's only possible because the bottom of his ribcage is back and up and not forward. His head being forward of his back is not a problem. It's actually helping him maintain such a long and sturdy back. However, if Masoero were to attempt to pull his head backward to be in line with his back, he would lose the support of his back. To keep his head backward, he would have to move the bottom of his ribcage forward, and that would not make him taller, that would make him shorter. That would not improve his torso, it would destroy its integrity, and he would find it almost impossible to hop his legs as he is here while maintaining the poise of his chest. We can also look at these pictures of me. You can see in the later picture that I've been able to flatten out my lower back. My sternum is no longer angled, and I've gained in stature. But my head is still forward of my back. Really, my head, arms, and upper torso would ideally be even further forward than what I'm showing here. But if I tried to pull my head back, as is often advised, my lower ribs would move forward. That would take my thoracolumbar fascia out of play, rotate my ribcage back, resulting in an angled sternum, and would likely force my pelvis to go into a faulty forward and down rotation like in the older picture here. You can also see in the older picture that my abdomen is protruding out in front of me, whereas it is not in the later picture. It's only possible for me to get the mid-torso back because I have the weight of my head and shoulders forward. I want to really emphasize this. The only way to maintain your abdomen and lower ribs back is to get the weight of the top of your ribcage, as well as your head and arms, forward. Look at most examples of so-called good posture, and you will see that their mid-torso, their abdomen and lower ribs, are very far forward of their ankle and are protruding out ahead of them. Why would we imagine that it's a problem to have your head forward, but then also believe it's desirable to have your belly and lower ribs falling ahead of you? There's no logic to it. This absurd pressing down of the ribcage that is often in before pictures of forward head posture is in no way an inevitable result of the head being forward of the back. In many examples of forward head posture before and after pictures, the before is fake in the sense that the person is just doing an imitation of forward head posture and not displaying an actual problem they had. In pictures like this, they will often force their ribcage down towards their pelvis. Naturally, that will look awful and result in bad posture, but that has nothing to do with the head really and is all about the torso. People out there are making completely unsupportable claims that if the head is forward of the back, that the weight of the head and neck will pull your ribcage down. But that's not true. We can see that for a fact in these pictures. People believe that having the head forward leads to drooping of the ribcage because that's what they've experienced. But they've only experienced that because they lack support from their back. If a person with a bent and compromised torso puts their head forward, it will pull them down precisely because they cannot rely on their back for support. And since they don't know how to change the condition of their torso, they just manipulate the position of the head and arms. Of course, the orientation of the torso can be changed, as we can see in these pictures. Their heads are forward of their backs, but their rib cages are high above their pelvises. So what can a person do when they aren't getting support from their back? They can leave their head forward and look stooped, or they can throw their head and shoulders back and at least they won't look hunched over. But that's not good posture, and that won't lead to a stronger back. If you have a bent and shortened back, and the resulting limp fascia, you really can't support your head and neck, whether your head and neck are forward or pulled back. If you don't address the torso, you are stuck with only bad options. The lack of understanding around how to actually get a strong supportive back has led many people to follow really misguided advice that is harming their posture and their health. The concept of forward head posture is completely wrong, and you will miss the real problems in your torso if you focus on the fool's errand of trying to get your head backward to be in line with your back. Obviously, people don't like having their head falling forward, since it looks bad and it's noticeable, because when we look at other people, we mostly look at their face and not their torso. But if your head really is falling forward, it's due to a lack of support from your back and the fascia in your back. And if you try to address the head and neck first by pulling your head backward, you will just end up messing your back up further, restricting your airway, and giving yourself forward rib posture, which is just as unbalanced, just as harmful, and just as much a path to pain as you imagine forward head posture to be. I think this idea of just pulling the head and shoulders back developed because people find it a lot easier to intentionally move their head and shoulders than to intentionally move the parts of their torso. We are familiar with moving our head and shoulders, so we can adjust their position if we want to. But most of us don't have any experience adjusting the parts of our torso. So when someone starts to try to change their posture, they don't start with their torso. They move their head and shoulders because that's what they know how to do. In these pictures of adjustments to deal with forward head posture, they aren't intentionally moving their ribs forward. That's just the result of them pulling their head and shoulders back. They likely aren't even thinking about their ribs or their torso when they move their head and shoulders. But your postural problems are not just in your head and shoulders, they're in your torso too. So wouldn't it be helpful to be able to intentionally move the parts of your torso just as easily as you move your head and shoulders? Unfortunately, posture is a very misunderstood problem, and there is a lot of bad information out there. People who are new to looking at their posture will see the very noticeable problem of their drooping head and think that forward head posture as the explanation makes sense. My head is forward, so I gotta pull it back. But those people end up going in circles wondering why their posture isn't really improving and their pain isn't really going away, because they're not changing their posture for the better. They're just going from one unbalanced posture to another. They're trading their forward head for forward ribs. If you're looking for help with your posture, or you just want a strong back that can support your head and neck, I highly recommend lessons in the initial Alexander technique. Lessons, which are done one-on-one over Zoom, are aimed at helping you gain the ability to consciously adjust the parts of your torso. Then you will be able to correct the harmful habitual rotations of your ribcage and pelvis that are destroying the integrity of your back. And once you've done that, you will see that having your head forward of your back wasn't the problem at all, and is actually necessary to maintain your back in its most lengthened and widened configuration. More information on how to get lessons in the initial Alexander technique will be in the description. You are also welcome back to this channel, where we will be exploring how to correct our posture in a rational way that leads to long-term results. Thank you for your time. Questions and comments are always welcome in the comment section below.